Everyone see that then, the title slide?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Very good. So yeah, I've certainly enjoyed getting to know Terry over the last 15 or so years, particularly at the Midwest narrow gauge meets, but NMRA meets as well. And in addition to really talking modeling, which Nancy and I both do, she's been always thrilled to hear bug stories and insects and all the other things that were part of Terry's professional career. So in this clinic, what I'd like to do is really talk about detailing models. And the idea is really to individualize the models with details. So whether you scratch build or kit build or somewhere in between, whether it be kit bashing or kit bundling, that you can add details that really personalize your model. And I think some of the aspects in sharing models at conventions and some of the other meets is that really people react differently to a lot of the details that you add. This is a good example, and this is probably a better title slide for this presentation. This was a scene that I put together for the 2016 Nmri Calendar. And so I was just trying to represent Appalachia, late 1930s, everything's run down with the sign, the fence, and the Whitcomb locomotive. And Terry sent me an email, and it was pretty simple. He said, "Hey, thanks for modeling me." And so there's just many times people react to different details a little bit differently. So that model there, the fellow in the center, has since become a mascot for our HON30 group. We call him Tiny Terry. So, but all right, we'll get into the clinic proper here. So we'll look at details that are applied onto and around structures and actually in them as well, just to define the purpose and really supplement telling a story. A lot of times I had built models with interior details, and the only way you could see them is if you had a removable wall or roof. But with LEDs that are scaled to HO scale, at least, and certainly O scale, you can really open up those doors and windows and then just light them. So we'll touch on detailing and then illuminating them with scale light. We'll also look at some vehicles as well, whether it be on the rails or rubber tired. They're details in themselves that can be additionally detailed to customize. And we'll start with scenic details, really things that you can add along with trees and ground cover and weeds and that sort of thing. We'll start with mailboxes. They're relatively simple detail that you can add. In this case, it just supplements this farm scene with the dog, the buckboard, the fence. And these were scratch built, but for many years, probably decades, Woodland Scenics has had a whole set. And so that's really the balance between detailing. If you have enough money, there's certainly a lot that you can buy out there and get custom made with the emergence of laser cutting and 3D printing. But if you're on a budget and you have the time, you can scratch build these type of details. So as far as the closed mailbox, relatively simple. If you have a rectangular or square cross section of basswood and a dowel that you can cut down, you could really put them together and then cut them to length, add a paper clasp and a nameplate, and you're all set. You could mass produce the mailboxes. And these happen to be HO scale, but the large ones in HO are perfectly usable in O scale. The open boxes are a little bit more involved. 4 rectangles, bend the large rectangle, tack it in place with Eileen's or Elmer's carpenter's glue. And what I'd like to do is hit it with CA as well. And Loctite is readily available, easy to use, very liquid super glue. And then glue on the backside, and then round the front side and glue it so that it's open. As far as the flags, really 4 cuts. You start out with a rectangular piece of paper, 1 cut, 2 cut, trim the flag, dull coat them if they're just paper, and then just hit them with acrylic. And it's a quick way to make a flag, another detail. Posts, really, you can look through your scrap box, whether they're plastic, wood, even a old Grant Line corbel. So there's quite a variety of posts that you can make, just old sprue, even the circular posts. And then there's racks that you can put together. You can see the below the boardwalk here. Just a wide variety of ways you can install mailboxes into your scenes. And many times these are appellation scenes that just imply that there's other households somewhere in the valleys or the hollers or the hills beyond. Many times in rural areas, instead of a row of posts, you see these racks, and relatively easy to model with just some scrap wood from your scrap box, and really accent the scene. So if this structure looks familiar, it's because it was from a Walker Evans photo. He was one of the government photographers in the 1930s that was part of the employment program to go around and document America. So this was in Birmingham. It was truncated, so we really didn't know what it was called. Could have been riverfish fillet, could have been something else that ended in ER. But I wanted to really replicate the vegetables, the fruits, and even on beyond the woman, you can see the fish display. So these details were put together, and the masters are all in the foreground, and they were put together mostly with basswood. The crates were, and those are copper balls that I think I had gotten from a laboratory supply kit, and so they just simulate either fruit or nuts or some other similar item. And then you see the watermelons, cucumbers, zucchini, even down to corn. Those were just made either with blobs of putty or just carved from basswood, and then sealed in this case so they wouldn't stick to the molds. And so this is the micromark system. The lavender material is the putty, and then the lighter gray material is their liquid, the two-part liquid. So if you look in micromark, and they have casting, room temperature vulcanizing rubber. So these castings are, this system's a little bit more elaborate, but you can use them about 20 times. And the quality is not great from the standpoint of all kinds of flash, but they clean up relatively easily. This is white plastic urethane that's relatively soft, and it's much like styrene in that you can cut it, score it, snap it. But certainly if you're going to do a wide array of detailing, like in the riverfish fillet, then it's certainly worthwhile. You can see all the crates along the front, and then you saw those other items that were worked out outside. So that center display with the fish, they were just built by cutting an outline of a fish out of cardstock and then just built up with acrylic. So sometimes details can be as simple as that, just paper and paint or cardstock and paint. The ice bed that they sit on is just salt. Don't use sugar, that'll attract vectors, but salt is a good way to just simulate the ice. And then the rest of the cabinet was just scratch built with styrene. But even with, say, all these windows and doors and the skylight, you really can't see that detail very much. You can certainly see the peripheral detail on the outside, particularly if you get lower and look in. But this model was one of those ones that got me to thinking, if I could just really find some scale lighting, it would really accent some of these details much better. So this, probably built 20 years afterwards, is a Boatworks. It's actually a prototype in England, Bright Lean Sea, England. But it looked like it could be in Maine, so we'll work it into Reed's Cove, the next module in the HON 30 group. So there's a series of 5 LED lights then that illuminate uh, one for the workshop, two for the boat building bay, one up top for the material storage, and then one other LED for the boat repair area or bay. So you can see that in this case, there was no need really to have any removable panels or roofs, because you can really see all the detail with the LEDs. So this gives you a little bit better idea then of what they look like in proportion to the detail. So these are Grant Line lampshades. They're styrene. Yeah, they're certainly not metal, and I believe they're cast styrene. And so the LED fits very well into them, and the conductors are so thin and small that we'll point them out in just a little bit. But when you can compare them to, say, even 22 gauge wire, you can hardly even see the conductors here. So we've really got good scale lighting. And as far as the color here, these are called golden white. But even if you have the white ones, you can touch them with a little bit of acrylic in, say, Elmer's white glue. And so you can get the cast that you want. I like these golden white ones available from LED Baron. I think it's German version of eBay, but you can get them. And you can get them probably within 10 days for about $12 for 10 of them with shipping. So, but the ones to use are the 0402. So these are how small they are, and you definitely want to get the ones that already have the conductors soldered on them. You can see how small they are compared to, I think that's a grain of rice maybe. So one of the smaller light bulbs, but you can see really how small they are. So you just bend them, thread them through the light shade, and then you're all set. Now those conductors, even though they look like they're not insulated, there's a very thin coating of lacquer on them. So they're very springy. They're somewhat difficult to use, and that's probably the hardest part of installing them. So you're gonna have to look closely on this one. So here's the one on the second floor. All right, so here's the lampshade, and then here are the two conductors that have been glued together and then painted. So the nice thing is that you can use then the conductors themselves to look like the conduit that's holding up the shade, and then you just paint it. And then and this is wired in series, so it comes up one side, goes across, goes down to the lampshade, and then goes across and then down the other side. And so then as you install them, by just tacking it in place, you use usually Eileen's or Elmer's Carpenter, something thick to tack it in place, and just paint it as you go. Fortunately, the copper colored conductors you can just paint with acrylics. Some of the other ones, the grayer, you have to use a solvent based, because acrylics won't stick to it. And you can see down below here, so there's one lampshade there and one lampshade there for the boat bay. And since the wires are so thin, you can actually just tack them in place on top of the joists, and then put the floorboards right over them. So it's real convenient to install the wiring by just tacking it into place. You could even do knob and tube if you know what type of wiring that is, and use little pieces of styrene for the insulators if you wanted to get that detailed. So this is the underside of that model. The pink foam was carved to look like stonework, and then this is the first floor. So then the conductors that go to a 9-volt battery then go to two different circuits, and these are our current regulators. So whether you use a 9-volt or a 12-volt power pack, you won't burn out LEDs, and you can do 3 of those on a circuit with with this setup. So so really just strip away the wire, solder that into place, and then just use pieces of masking tape to hold it together, and temporarily while I'm testing it, and then go back and just hit these with dabs of glue to hold them in in place. It's a relatively simple circuit with that current limiter. And those are available from Microlumina. There's probably other places as well. Microlumina has a very good selection. They don't really have the very small ones that are pre-wired. So between Microlumina and the LED Baron, you can really get everything you're looking for in scale lighting. And so this is a really important aspect, is to test everything as you go. I think it's really important also from the standpoint, you have to keep things plus or minus, otherwise you'll burn out the LEDs. But you can see the lighting down below for the first floor, and then here's the upper floor. And so you could just barely see the black conductor come up along the knee brace, along over, then it comes down, and then the other conductor comes down all the way. So you just tack into place and then do the rest of your detailing as you get the after you get the lighting in place. All right, so these are all the first floor details, and many times in a model like this, I'll really look to model the details as small models themselves. Many times using, say, stock details like this bench grider from SS Limited, but then mixing it in with other non-traditional details like the gasoline tank from a Jordan Fordson tractor, or even some other pieces where they're put on carts. So really tend to even try to customize a lot of the details as well, and build them as a group together as models. And sometimes it is tedious to work on smaller things, but once you get the whole set done, then the fun part is actually installing them and then seeing how they go together. So that's really how this model was done. All those other details were put into place with this arrangement, and there's just enough floorboards on the second floor to keep it structurally sound so it doesn't warp, or just a little bit of rough handling doesn't break things. So then they were put into place. The ship, or the boat under construction, was built outside and then just slipped into place and glued. And there's a school in the Pacific Northwest that had some website photos showing some younger college-age kids actually building this. So that's really what this was. Just looked at the photos and then built something similar to it, and then just doing a little bit of research and looking at some repair places in some of the sawhorses, and then specialty clamps. These are alligator clamps with a cam on top. Just doing some of the specialty details separately. Then C-clamps that we're all familiar with, and then these tools are just a mix. So getting to progressively smaller and smaller details that are more specially to, say, this boat building shop. And then the boats themselves. In this case, there were really 3 different boats that surrounded the boatworks. So I guess post-World War II and well on into the 1950s, magazines like Popular Mechanics and some of the other competitors at the time ran quite a few boat building articles. And you can just download these on the internet as PDFs. This one's the Build Happy Clam, the very sparse titles, but they give instructions, and then they give a very detailed bill of materials and a plan and section, and some of the profiles. So you just photocopy it down to HO scale in this case, and then just go ahead and really build it like they tell you to build a full-size one. So it's almost like a set of instructions. So the Happy Clam even had a 5-horsepower motor, and it showed you really how to put in the shaft and the impeller. So that's that model there. It's really a lot of fun. I had never really tried anything like this, but and here's kind of the framing and then the sheathing, but it was really a lot of fun and really a change of pace. The boat, same sort of way, except it was done with a solid balsa hull, and then it was just planked on the outside, and then styrene and some other cast-off pieces just formed the mast and the other components. And because it was solid hull, then just a piece of tissue paper was used to really cover it as a boat cover. And then this model, which we'll look at in just a little bit, it was just a cast off from the old Revell Constitution kit. So this was one of the longboats that was just taken and upsized to be more appropriate for HO. Okay, so this gets a little closer to the Great Lakes group, and most of the structures that I've modeled are really drab. They're needing a coat of paint, or they've never been painted at all. They're real weathered. But if you model this scene has a lobster boat in it. You have lobstermen or women. They have each individual buoys, and so that, in addition to a variety of floats, you can add a little bit of color into your models, along with, and these are just commercial details from J&L Innovation. So again, mixing and matching. And yeah, the prototype had something that looked like a basketball hoop, so that was just cardstock. So again, the mixing and matching of details, in this case, just to add a little color. And the really important part is that probably all of us in our lifetime have gotten the comment, did you build that out of toothpicks? Well, this is the one item that you can say, yeah, I actually did use toothpicks, and you just round the edges of them, and give them a little bit more of the buoy shape, drill out the end, put in a length of brass wire, and if you don't want to get really detailed, a little loop on the end to be able to hang it on the side, and then prime them and just paint them a variety of colors. Basswood was used for these floats as well, same sort of thing, just cutting them a little bit more up on the toothpick. And then these are just beads that you can use as floats, and then put an eyelet in there, or a lift ring, something like that, or just loop around just a piece of wire. So again, these are commercially available. You could buy them as well, but you get quite a wide variety of even shapes and sizes if you just use a few round toothpicks. Okay, now we'll move on into vehicle detailing. And again, vehicles really are details in themselves, but how you can customize them and make them your own. This is a Jordan popcorn wagon, vastly diminished now that it's been built. It would be worth a fortune in Bitcoin now if I would have just kept it unbuilt in mint condition in its box. But anyway, we'll just have to deal with it the way it is. But this is somewhat of a conversion for the Wines Inlet HON30 Great Lakes module. So it's a Moxie lunch cart. And so a lot of these bits and pieces are truly that, from the scrap box, pieces of wood and styrene. And then the bits of paper, they were just glued on to the styrene windows. And what you do there is just put a dab of glue. Sorry about that. We'll get back to there. All right. It's kind of out of my hands here. Here we go. All right, so I think we're back to control here. I'm not sure, had some sort of glitch with the computer, but just put a dab of glue on the inside of whatever glazing, and this is just evergreen 15,000 clear styrene, and then you put your piece of paper there, the glue dries clear, but then you still have the gloss on the outside. So that's how you can add a lot of different signs to various windows. So sometimes when you're going to detail the interior, particularly a model this small, you've just got to plan it and build it in stages. In this case, the exterior was painted, and then the interior was painted, and then just a swatch from a catalog was added for a linoleum type floor. The popcorn maker, that's part of the kit, but then the shelf, the Baby Ruth sign, and then the popcorn boxes and the candy boxes, they're just scrap wood that were cut up and then painted a variety of different colors so that they would show through into, so you could actually look into that front window and then just see the color in the background. And so many times when you have interior details for a smaller model, you want to make sure they're bright and light so that you can actually see them. And so this is the backside then, again, with those the posters and the items on the door glued in the same fashion. And even the placards on the outside were just glued into place with white glue. And then I'll usually put over a piece of wax paper and then burnish them. And then it looks like they're really tightly held to the side of the vehicle. All right, so this is a bookmobile. I think it was Jim Amato who had sent me a photograph in the 1930s in the Cincinnati area of a bookmobile very similar to this. And I had this model. It was a built up, already purchased, a Bush kit. It actually wasn't a kit. It was just you bought it built up. So I said, all right, it shouldn't be that difficult to cut this out and then cut out the back doors. Well, it's really wrong about that. Whatever Bush uses, whatever German styrene, it's not what we're used to. It's not score and snap. So I actually had to use a jeweler's saw to cut out that inverted C shape on the doors in the back. You can see that very nasty gash is when I finally gave up with the X-Acto knife. So again, it's one of those things that just keep at it sometimes. When you think something's simple, it turns out to be hard. Just put it away for a week or a month, and then you can go back to really doing what you want to do, which was the model this bookmobile. Never would have thought that it was harder to take a model apart than it was to put it together, particularly building some of those Jordan models. But anyway, all the interior details for this model is wood. So the two shelves were made out of scale basswood, and then the books, just you can see a variety of different colors. This is just from a scrap box. So various pieces of basswood were cut up and painted to look like individual volumes. It probably would have been easier if I would have just glued a bunch of them together and painted them, but it was a two-step process. After they were initially painted, then they were put down on a strip of masking tape and then just hit with a few stripes and make it look like titles and gold pieces, striping, horizontal striping and such, and then flipped over 90 degrees, and then just a dash of tan made it look like some pages, and then they were stacked and then put into the model just as a book stand. So that's really a fan favorite in Wyden's Inlet module. For a while, this was there as well. It has since migrated to another module. If you can see it, it's on pins. And that's one thing about portable modules. And when you have these composite details, that these are Jordan horses that are styrene and very light, but this is a metal log wagon and this is plastic. So sometimes you really want to protect your details as well. So that's why this was pinned into place. So what we'll look at is really this detail. Although I do want to point out one thing is that Pricer makes some small animals, fish, avians, reptiles, and many times kids, particularly in Dayton, both at Carillon Park and their annual November train show, like to go and look for the squirrels, the rats, the rabbits, and the one that they overlook, but we pointed out is, so that's a red-headed woodpecker. So that's how small your detailing can get in HO. And again, that's a commercial piece, so we would have really never thought of it. But so really the detailing can get very small, but it really does fascinate particularly the little kids to see that they've seen a woodpecker model that small. So this was really a compilation of just scrap box pieces. I tend to try to go to the local IPMS show, that's International Plastic Modeler Society. And they're mainly military modelers, but there's a lot of cars and there's a lot of kits that people try and you cast off. So if you're an HO scale modeler, there's a lot of 1/72nd stuff that would be useful, 1/48th, 1/35th. So that this is just, I think this is some sort of tank or tracked bogey. This is a 1/35th. Whoops, sorry about that. We'll get it back. So this is the shaft to a 1/35th machine gun. So sometimes just mixing and matching some of these components are a good way to start some of these unique details. And this was by chance, I happened to be in an antique shop. I think it was in Morgantown, West Virginia, and there was this motor from the 1920s. So I photographed it and then just built this from the photos. There was a rudder too, and so this is actually just a photocopy from one that was in some sort of article. And so I was able to download that photo, just print it out, and then reduce photocopy down. So it's just paper that's been coated with Loctite CA. So you can plasticize paper and it'll hold up really well. You just coat both sides. And people always ask, well, how do you do that? Well, you hold one portion of it with the tweezers, and then you just coat what you can, and then you let that dry for a couple of hours, and then you hold the other piece and finish it off. And you can see it's kind of glossy. And so this was just black and white photocopier. And so once you go to this level of detail, you want to test fit it before you paint it. And so I really recommend that as you go in each of the detailing steps, if it is something like this, make sure that you test fit it and that you fix all the imperfections before you start painting it. So definitely have construction phases, test fitting, and then if you need to, take it apart and then do the final finishing. And so you see that for the most part, this was done in metallic tones and then just washed. And then the final detail was a spark plug and some wires just to finish it off. So sometimes finishing and detailing the detail is somewhat of an iterative effort as well. All right, so we'll move on to locomotive detailing. Just the cab here. I was very fortunate to find a fellow that was restoring a Whitcomb, and he put entries on his blog, so you could follow along and learn a lot about the locomotive just by reading his blog. And so the plans that I followed didn't really have any photos of the cab or the items, but his blog had enough such that he had a nice shot of the control panel. So I was able to just download that photo, reduce photocopy it down, and then add a couple of items to make it 3D and go over it with dull coat, and then just use that as the panel. The rest of these items, for instance, I think this is from an airplane seat that was cut down. The air compressor is just a bunch of pieces that looked close to what the air compressor was in that photo. The levers are just cardstock with a grip made up with thick acrylic. The battery box is just cardstock that was hardened with CA. You can see the dark along there. So it's just tacked together with Aleene's tacky glue, and then CA was used to plasticize it, and then to the point where you can actually drill those holes in just cardstock that's like an index card. The throttle and the brake stand were just pieces of styrene as well. And this was just a styrene tube that was built up with some evergreen shapes, and then just a nut bolt washer casting to make it look like the fill port. So relatively simple details made mostly from cast-offs and cardstock. And so they were all spray painted and then installed. So they could really illustrate fairly well then what it was like to be an operator within this Whitcomb's cab. All right, so this rail truck, this is detailing with a purpose. And so this rail truck was kind of a kit bash. You can see the gray parts were commercial and the white parts were styrene, just plain evergreen styrene. And the power for this is a Bachmann trolley motor. And so the way this was set up was that this set screw held the power truck, and then this bed then just went under the cab and it was screwed into place. So the problem though is that this power truck stuck up quite high, And so there's no real way to conceal it unless you were going to fully enclose the bed. And I really didn't want to do that with the superstructure. So really just built a crate around it with basswood to make it look like it was a big new crate, and then just use the other detail, scratch build toolbox. And then I think the rest of these components are just cast off from plastic kits that I bought at IPMS shows, just a little bit of thread for rope. These are a couple commercial castings, and then just tissue paper for the blue flags and some basswood. So then they were just glued on and around then that box. And this was this crate was really just a press fit over the top of that power truck, and that in turn this was a press fit over the top there. So each of the pieces were then individually painted and detailed and then screwed together. And then that back door then was after put a figure in there, we could leave that open, and the justification was for with these longer boards. So again, the detailing in here was just all based on hiding the top portion of this power truck, but also allowing something to be a little bit different than you normally see with all the doors closed up. And I think the other aspect here is, again, because this is so light and the guy's holding some papers, you can actually look in and see the detail. If it was much darker, you wouldn't really be able to see that normally on the layout. And so this is a locomotive ON30 that was kit bashed from a Bachmann Forney. So the backside was the frame was cut off, and so then the truck that's normally connected to the Forney body was just made into a separate tender. So this is the same sort of case where, because this cab is much smaller than the Forney, the can motor stuck out, so you need to really model a backhead to hide that. Fortunately, in this case, Grant Line has a Porter kit for that. So except for the brass wire and some of the gray parts, this is really a kit that you can get from Grant Line. And so it's the same sort of aspect that we've talked about before. So it was just dull coated and painted a little bit lighter, because even with that cab open, if it was much darker, you wouldn't be able to see the detail. So it was painted light as far as the firebox and the top, and then the other parts, the piping, the levers, were dry brushed to bring out some of the detail. But once it goes in there, then you can see some of the items. I mean, if it was much darker, probably the only thing you'd be able to see really is the pressure gauge, and that was just a piece of paper, a gauge that was reduced photocopy down, glued into place, and then just sealed with gloss coat to make it look like there was glass over the top of it, just to give a little bit of contrast from everything else that's dull, rusty, and dingy. So, and as far as detail, when you've got a complex model that has, say, for instance, in this case, piping, this is the interior of a steam-driven Barnhart log loader. So the two tanks, the two lateral tanks are water tanks, and then the boiler in the center. So when you're trying to work all this out, many times if you just build the pieces up on basswood, you can see here as well, and that way you get all the geometry correct for how you're going to install it in the model. Then you can do all the finishing, and then you can just install components as you go that are already finished. So sometimes you have to think about in detail how I'm going to finish this, what finish I want it to be, and then it's a simple matter of then trying to glue everything up and then just hide some of those seams. So this is the finished model, where you can see that the tanks on either side are a little bit more rusty. Tried to do a different finish here, but again, lighter than they normally would, so you could actually see in and see some of the detail as well, even though every door and every open space is open for that matter to get as much light in this relatively dark and small area in the Barnhart loader. Okay, so this is another model that crosses lines with Terry. So I think many years ago, maybe approaching 10 or so, he had a make and take clinic with signs, and he gave me a bunch of those at the Midwest Narrow Gauge meet. So all of the signs that you see on the inside of the shop, and this is very thin. It's one of those background models. It's only an inch deep or so. I was able to use those. And then a lot of the items on the door and in the windows are much like we talked about for that Jordan popcorn cart, where the glazing 15 thousandths clear styrene from Evergreen was put into place, and then dabs of white glue were put on the backside of the window, and those were all put into place. Now the seed packets themselves down here, this is just a piece of clapboard siding from Northeastern turned upside down, and then just small pieces of paper to represent seed packets were put into those slots, so to speak. As far as the exterior signs, the top sign here and the placard, they come from this photo, and this was, I think, Smithsonian Magazine, showing this elaborate seed box that you'd get and so it was just photocopied, the original photo from the magazine, photocopied different sizes, and then framed with basswood up here, and I think just dull coated and then mounted on some basswood as well. So except for the tripod here and the frame, all the other details that you see here are just paper, just pieces of paper, colored paper to simulate the packets and the flyers and some of the display posters. So this is the ubiquitous old-time Walthers conveyor, but it doesn't look like the Walthers conveyor, and that's simply because it was truncated. The Walthers conveyor is a straight-up discharge, and I'd seen some pictures in coal yards, so it's really just a simple matter of slicing out really a triangle and re-gluing this back into place, and then just kind of dusting that transition area with a little bit of coal dust to hide that seam. So it was really a quick modification of a detail that you see quite a few other places. I did add some bracing here, and that's just brass wire that was that silvered up, and then just one of those chutes for the waste chutes that shown. That was just cardstock that was cut out. So you can actually detail a detail and really make it your own with one cut of, I think it was a razor saw. And it was more than one cut, but it was a little bit of sawing, and then just adding a few cardstock bits and pieces and 4 lengths of brass wire. So again, model 1930s. So this is a Civil War era boxcar that is used storage, but in this case, the boxcar itself and the office, there's just enough detail around the door and the windows to make it look like there's something inside. And you can see there's somewhat of a theme here too. So between the caboose, the 2 storage structures, even the outhouse, every door is open, every window is open, just to imply that there's something going on. And then once you do that, you have to just have some sort of details in there. And many times, if you have things in your scrap box, or you've wrecked a detail, or that something didn't come out right, just save it and use it as an interior detail. Another example with these are coal carts that were pulled out of the mine by dogs. So it was a 1905 mine in West Virginia. So those 2 didn't come out too well. I didn't throw them away. For some reason, they're misshapen. Just wasn't happy with them. So this one became a coal bin. This one, had turned it over and it became a step. So even if details that you scratch build don't come out, you can find use for them somewhere on your layout, either in a building or in some other type of service. Sometimes details could be as simple as rocks. In this case, this is a gravel crusher. This is just a standard Woodland Scenics stamp mill. This crusher was scratch built following, I think, an advertisement in Good Roads magazines. Was a trade publication, and they late 19th century on into the 1920s, and then a conveyor up into a bin. And they used to build these bins temporarily where they needed a lot of gravel. So this is Woodland Scenic's ballast, brown ballast. So I just got some rocks that were similar in color, stained them with a little bit of acrylic just to make it look like, hey, lighter rocks become then that gravel after stamping. So get relatively simple detail that makes it, you know, a interesting scene. Same thing in this case. There's a wide variety of details, but this is just a cut up twig for someone cutting up firewood for the winter. It's framed by some more elaborate details. This watering can was just built up from scrap pieces of basswood, and this wheelbarrow was also built up from basswood. And then that's a Jordan wheel from the 1905 Oldsmobile, and so that's it over in the weeds. So even in the 1930s, you could have a car up on blocks in Appalachia. So it just happened to be from 1905. So again, try to use all of the details just to convey a relatively simple country scene. All right, we'll conclude with this structure. This is the Flagstop Station at Pines Inlet, again, HON 30 module building. And it was a project to use styrene to see if walls could be simulated scale thickness. So this is a lamination of two different types of evergreen scribe siding. And then all of the trim is just wood, and the windows and the doors are tissue or Grant Line castings. So it was just really somewhat of an experiment to see if it
Did we lose Sam?
I was thinking it might be my computer,
No.
but it's not.
No. Yeah, he looks frozen.
I lost Sam right in the middle of a statement.
Terry, you going to give him a call, or are you giving him a call?
No, I think we're back. Okay, are we back?
Yep, we're all set, Sam.
Yep, you're back, Sam.
Oh, okay. Can you see the structure?
You're gonna reshare it.
All right. Are we back?
Yes, we are. Sam.
Yes, we are.
Okay. So that dreaded wheel in the center. So I'm not sure how we lost connectivity. Blame it on Nancy. Anyway. Okay. So did everyone hear this was an experiment to see if scale walls could be modeled? That's where it left off. So as far as as far as the interior details, then they were just things that I had in some of my part bins, from the potbelly stove to a styrene smoke pipe, and thought, well, these are just SS limited frames. So I thought, well, maybe I'll put a picture on each of these 4 panels, and then the rest of it were just other details that it had inside.
Did we lose him again?
I think so.
I'm here. I'm
Oh,
trying
good.
to advance it. Yeah, I'm trying to advance it. It seems to be locked up. There was some reverb and feedback.
Is Nancy's computer near yours, Sam?
It's on the second floor and I'm on the third floor.
Oh, okay, because no, you'd have to be nearby for the feedback to be from that.
Yeah.
We got the new picture.
Okay. So that's the station interior. And so you can see some of the photos, and then just that relatively simple styrene bench. I'm not sure where it came from. And so it was just painted and then just a little bit of varnish to give it a lighter color. And then the rest of the details pretty much were just newspapers, books, and then a coat on the rack. As far as then the scenic details, those were just from Woodland Scenics. So in this case, then the only other exterior detail was the flag itself, and that was just the piece of paper. So detailing really many times doesn't have to be elaborate. And a lot of the times, I bet you have a lot of the detail components within your drawers or some boxes, but however you store it. And the only other accent then was actually the station manager just rolling up a piece of paper in his hand as well. The rest of them were stock figures. So I think really to sum up, detailing is that you probably have quite a few details on hand. And if you think of combining, say, figures with a vehicle and then some supplementary details, like in this case, the fishing poles, the today's catch, and obviously the setting with the Preston fish, which is a Ferry and Hayden model. This is a model of someone else's model. You can really set the scene, tell a story, and then really involve the viewers, whether they come to your house or in this case a traveling module, and a lot of people come to see your setup with your friends. So again, that's really a cross section of detailing. And if there are any comments, questions folks have, Terry, I guess I'll unshare my screen so we can all talk.
Yeah, there was a question, Sam. How did you make the chain drive on the rock crusher?
Okay, so the window screen, the fiberglass window screen, you can get it in a silver color. And so if you cut one strip of squares out, and then you cut that in half and you offset it and you glue it back together with CA, you can then cut that strip. And then that's how you can get that kind of belt-like, chain-like look.
Is that about 6 slides back? Do you think we could go back and peek at that?
Yes, I could certainly do that. So we're talking that chain right there.
Let's see. I see the flag stop station is what I've got up. Now the hillside.
Okay.
There's a delay, I think, as Sam goes back.
There it is.
There you go.
Okay. So it's this right here. That's what you're interested in?
Yes.
Yeah. So if you take a swatch of that silver colored, I think it's fiberglass window screen. It's the plastic version. It's not the metal version. And if you just then cut down a center row and then offset it and glue it back together, that's how you can get just the real small squares. And then you let that dry, and then you just cut the edges. So it's just really a compressed square of fiberglass window screen.
Okay. Well, thank you, Sam. I'm going to open it up now. If people will not pile on all at once and just unmute themselves one at a time, feel free to pop in and ask questions.
Sam,
Yes.
you have a lot of weathered wood, clapper, decking, roofing, shingles, and I was wondering if you can give a capsule 1-minute summary of, of how you do that to get the variation and anything you might want to say on that.
Yes. So I think more and more have been using just the craft acrylics. And so a lot of the basswood is just stained with, say, a black color that's been grayed a little bit or browned a little bit. And I do consciously try to vary up each structure so that all the weathered wood doesn't look the same. There's also a color called barnwood that I've used as well for the base color. It's kind of a lighter gray, tanner gray, and then go over it with very dilute black. And I think it's important when you use the craft acrylics, it really doesn't matter who's the brand name on it. If you just get black rather than, say, pavement or graphite or some other fancy word for black. And so it's really a lot of dilute applications. The other thing too, to get some of the grayer looks or various tones, is if you take very small grit sandpaper like 600 or even the 1200, and you just lightly sand it, it'll actually impart a slightly different gray color over some of the boards as well. And if you take also a stiff bristle brush, you can go over it and impart, either a shine or just almost a sanding effect on that as well to get variations in gray.
Sam, I'm assuming that you're diluting the acrylic paints with alcohol rather than water, right?
I prefer water. Sometimes alcohol tends to gum them up. So what I do is just make some wet water where you take just a little bit, just a partial drop of liquid soap, whether it be dishwashing detergent or the stuff you use, the disinfecting for your hands, that liquid soap. But if you just put a little bit of that in 1 or 2 ounces of water, that makes then the acrylics, the craft acrylics, which are a little thicker, flow really well.
So you don't have any problem with warping?
So just about everything that I paint, I will prime first with gray primer.
Okay.
If it's straight up wood, sometimes I don't, but I've really not had that much problem with warping. If there is any warping, I've usually been able to bend it back, but I really have never really had where it says, "Oh, this is ruined because of either too much water or it's warped."
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. When you say primer, gray primer, are you referring to like a rattle can spray primer?
Yes, I used to use the cheapest I could get at Walmart. They don't really make the gray primer anymore, but Rust-Oleum and now Krylon have this camouflage color set. And so there's tans and browns that I really recommend them, and they're not too heavy. I try to stay away from the double coat ones where it says 2X and that sort of thing. So I try to get the thinnest primer. So I stay away from really auto body and that sort of thing, because that's really a much heavier and it obscures the details. But I think if you use those camo primer, sand, khaki, and then some darker ones, they are really good. And they're maybe $4 a can, but they're readily available. You see them quite a few places. Rust-Oleum is really highly recommended, and I haven't tried the Krylon yet.
Thank you.
Sure.
Sam, a question on the roof, on the one you showed the buoys and the stuff hanging on the sides of the building? Great.
Yeah.
Was that
Yeah.
those individual shingles you used?
So those are urethane castings. So
Okay.
yeah, there's a kit called River Road Surplus by Mainline and Heritage, or Main Street and Heritage. And so they have a couple of panels there. So I just copied his roof panel and then just replicated it all through that entire model.
Well,
And so, well, thanks. That is, once it was built, then it was painted gray, and that was the Walmart gray, because that model's about, 13 or 14 years old now. And then a tan acrylic was dry brushed over it, and then individuals were painted variations of that tan with black added, so it's a warm tan, and then with a off-white, like an antique white, or like butter crunch, which is kind of a light yellow, to give variations of that gray. And then after all of those were done, then a thin black wash was selectively applied over certain areas to make it, particularly where the water would run over, to make those a little bit darker. So that's how those were done.
Yeah, very nice job.
Thanks.
Anybody else have questions for Sam?
I have a question for you, Sam. When you're working with the craft paints and various, and you may have different layers, different washes and so forth, do you have to periodically seal or dull coat or anything, in between steps, so that you don't undo previous work or blend it all together?
So I usually use a lot of time in between the steps. So if, for instance, there was a base coat that was done, then I'll let it dry overnight. And if then there's a major wash that goes on, then I'll let it dry overnight. So I really don't do a lot of things back to back to back. So I've not had that lifting problem. In fact, sometimes these craft acrylics stick too well, and it's difficult sometimes to correct a mistake. There's where I use alcohol, if you let it soak it and then scrub it off. But yeah, I've not really had a problem before with adherence. I think the only problem sometimes is the browns. If you dilute them, sometimes they will settle in areas that look chalky, kind of whitish. That's the only thing. And many times what I'll do is I'll supplement a brown with a little bit of black, just the name black, and it won't gray like that. But if you use, say, pavement and some other names for black, you'll tend to have some of that chalking. So that's the only issue I think I've had with these craft acrylics.
Anybody else?